Well, it is great to be here with you today and kick this off. It's a little bit humbling when I look at the roster of people that'll be speaking and in panel discussions after me. I know I'm first. They're going to get to the meat of the things as we go along. But I would ask you a couple of questions. You've heard a little bit about me, so just how much do you know about my background in terms of my engagement and how I am? And I'd ask you to think about that when you're listening to me talk in terms of being able to ask me questions. I like to be engaged. I like to hear what you're thinking and ask your questions going forward. I want to tell you a little bit about TRTC, for those of you that aren't aware, to kind of set the stage. That is a public-private group now. It was originally when it was created, and then Mayor Gary Fickus was one of the leading instigators of that. I used to term it as the organization that got everything built up to Alliance. That's kind of what they were really a part of. And over time, that role kind of morphed, and they came to me right smack in the middle of COVID and said they'd like to turn it into a public-private group. At the time, it was all cities and counties involved in it, and pretty much Tarrant County related. And so I said, sure, but here are some things I thought we ought to work on. So the bottom line is, we have a membership that's about 65 members. It's equally split between the public and the private sector. Rail, for example, is important to us. BNSF is one of our members. They're on our board. And it really is a nice way for the public and private people to talk policy, to talk roads and what we do. The second is TRTC. Unlike all those organizations I served on a board, we're an advisory body. I say this often in public, is that, for example, compared to the North Central Texas Council of Governments, that's the big T in transportation here locally. We're a little T comparatively. So we are somebody that advocates. I also, because of relationships that we have, sometimes we're carping skeptics, sometimes we're aggressive, and most of the time we're looking to do whatever and support that the region's doing. So that's kind of where I come from when I look at what we're talking about here today. We are clearly, as most places are in Texas, road-centric, but rail offers unique opportunities, particularly up here in the Metroplex, and ones that 10 years ago, for example, when I was on the Transportation Commission and the high-speed rail project was first rearing its head, my advice was, well, you just never know. If it works, it would be terrific. And then it kind of has gone into a trough. And now all of a sudden there's some things happening that make you think about it and believe that there perhaps is a good future there down the road. I'm not in the business of continuing to think. I buy green, but I don't buy green bananas. It's something that somebody taught me years ago in the car business, because obviously your life with a green banana might not get ripe enough for you. And so I don't know that that's going to happen during my lifetime. But I want to talk about a couple things that have happened here locally recently that you've probably read about. Maybe some of you even attended it all. So we have a downtown Dallas that has got a nice area planned for high-speed rail. And you have Amtrak's decision to get engaged in that. You've got some pieces. And so about 6 weeks ago, they had a hearing in downtown Dallas that went a little askew, where you had the line coming up, Amtrak here, Michael Morris fighting for it, and the city of Dallas was pushing back because of the stop in Arlington going on to Fort Worth. But when you then start to break all that down and forget about the stuff that you saw in the newspapers or heard on television, or if you were there to see it, the thing that's remarkable is it still exists. And you have professional, seasoned Amtrak staff. Some of it you'll hear from Mr. Byford here, I think, tomorrow. You have the COG, who, Lord knows, the greatest thing we have, the most combative thing we have, the most relentless thing we have is Michael Morris and the NCT COG, and this is a holy cause for them. That's the only way to describe it. It is something they want to see done. You have the cities, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington, if we get past the developer problem, that are really committed to this. And so over the last 6 weeks or so, I've kind of revised my opinion from doubtful to, well, it's maybe possible. I won't say yes or probable, but it's maybe possible. And that's something, I guess, my first charge to you is to listen to all the people that are experts in it. I'm more of a political person, but the experts in it, and take your own thoughts away from that. But I think those three cities are committed. You have a COG committed. You have a staff that will be there when and if Michael Morris ever retires. And I think they'll be on the path to get that done. And you never know what an administration does at a different time in Washington, D.C. So that's one thing that our group, I'd say we monitor that. We look at that as an option that we think about. The things that are important to us that are here now and today is, one, at-grade crossings, particularly in the northwest section of the TRTC territory. There are about 30 at-grade crossings going all the way up from downtown Fort Worth, up north, out through into Denton County and beyond. And those are something that the railroads are not going to pay for. We don't expect that. Maybe they'd be a participant. There's only so much you can do taking one bite at a time. But I do want to compliment the new blood that's come into Tarrant County, particularly Manny Ramirez, the county commissioner there. This is a cause for him, a passion for him, to make sure that we protect school children and people on those at-grade crossings. I know from personal experience in Arlington, Texas, growing up, that we were unable to convince the citizens there. I was a young boy, a little kid most of that time. We were unable to convince the citizens to do at-grade crossings or get rid of at-grade crossings, except where they didn't exist in the first place. No one wanted to have their businesses impacted, their schools impacted, et cetera. So if you're familiar with Arlington, you'll see some of the old parts, particularly in the center of town, where you have to wait for the railroad tracks, whereas the newer sections, which might be 30 years old now, 40 years old now, they are elevated or under, and you can get around. And so that's something I think is going to continue to be a focus. It's something this group will be helpful working with COG and the communities involved in it to try to see more of that happen. And then the last thing for us, I guess, is I would be not doing the right thing if I didn't say this, and that is the safety issues are very paramount, particularly on the commercial routes, which again goes at grades crossings. But those are three things that my group can be responsible for and advocating and pushing for. Now, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things in terms of everything you're talking about today? Not sure, but what I would say is that it's something to keep in mind and think about, and to recognize that what we are doing is we recognize that we're not a funder, we're not a developer, we have a lot of public servants on our group and on our board, but we are hopefully a facilitator of conversations and of professional expertise and coming together in which we can try to help see these potential projects get across the line. So that's kind of where TRTC comes from. What I would also again emphasize is that what we're not a replacement or a competition for the North Central Texas Council of Governments Regional Transportation Council staff. They are my great friends, colleagues, and we've worked in a lot of trenches together. I often say that when I come to a fight, I now fight for things that we need up here or anywhere else that needs support. I come with a pillow, but when Michael Morris comes, he has a mattress. So it doesn't mean we kill anybody, but we certainly come in there. And I'm very pleased that the resilience that staff continues to have in supporting the movement of freight and goods, and in supporting safety, and in supporting a different way of transportation. High-speed rail, for example, I've questioned that since the very beginning, wondering if it could really happen because of the immense cost to it. But Michael Morris convinced me a long time ago, as did others. He said, well, what would you have us do? We can't possibly build more roads. We can't possibly, once we did this next generation in the Metroplex of roads, we're pretty much done. And that's a good point. And so then a second emphasis, I guess, to think about in terms of the positive is that TxDOT did reserve the middle of the corridor on I-30. If you can somehow get this done, somehow get all through the rigmarole, they're not going to pay for it. But there is a wide swath right down the middle of I-30 that could connect from downtown Dallas to downtown Fort Worth with a stop in Arlington. I'm not talking about the billions it would take to make that happen, but that is reserved, and I've asked point blank to our folks, and ask them yourselves when you see them next time. David Salazar might not appreciate me calling him and his staff out, but also those in Austin, that they say that they can still do the next generation of road widening, and maybe the last one they can do in the I-30 corridor connecting Dallas to Fort Worth and eliminating some of the problems that we see there today. And so that is not impacted by the fact they have this wide swath in the middle for high-speed rail. So that's a positive, I'd say, for all of us to keep in mind and take into account going forward. The last but not least, I would want to say is something that I advocate a lot for. Want to see more of this in the western side where we are. Was very fortunate a decade ago in talking with then the district engineer Bill Hale about I had this crazy way that I think it led to the creation of the Department of Motor Vehicle. It led to some other things going on locally and also in the state where think more holistically, think longer term, think bigger picture. Don't box anything out, but ask questions and give life to everybody's ideas, even if they're crazy. And so we started a process that was known as Dallas City Map, which is a master assessment project. It's actually a major transportation investment study. It was done in the city of Dallas. And that study killed some things that weren't, when it came out back in the summer of 2016, it killed some things that really were very sacred to some folks, but it didn't make any sense. And it didn't kill it because it said it didn't make any sense. The facts and the data and the circumstances dictated that. But it also gave life to a lot of other things. Like, for example, around downtown Dallas, that you could really create, not along I-35, but along the Woodall-Rogers Thruway, I-345, which for those of you who don't know, you probably do, it's been in the news a lot in the last decade, which is really an elevated section between 45 and 75, and for I-30. And imagine what those could look like. And the city over there now, and just recently got about $100 million, about 80 of it was devoted to the downtown projects, where they're going to make an expanded Clyde Warren Park. They're going to deck over I-345, and they'll deck with the convention center coming across over I-30. So the art of the possible started in looking at it from TxDOT 10 years ago and completed 8 years ago, and now they're 10 years ahead on the horizon that they would have otherwise been on, and all of those projects are through and are going through some stage of construction funding. Don't know when that will all happen, but some of it will be soon. And so basically they're in a path to complete what looked to be a 30-year journey within 20 years. And those are the kind of things that I guess I have always championed, is to think holistically, work together, and see what you can do. Don't just give life to your ideas. Don't just say no to somebody else's idea if it doesn't suit your fancy or your function. Just give life to anything and let the chips fall from there. And that's also, I guess, the mantra that TRTC has to try to help encourage, and certainly with the powers that be at TxDOT, at NCT COG, or in the region. And we'll continue to do that and try to make headway doing that. And I think the combination of public-private has had a lot of headway in making good strides in that regard. So with that, I'd really like to take some questions from you, and if there's something you would like me to address based on the long history I've been around you for about the last 30 years. Please.
David Peter Allen, Railway Age. I text rail and the rail here in Texas that you have is great. But I do have a question. As I understand, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, Arlington is the largest city in America that has no public... Arlington is the largest city in America that has no public transportation, no buses or anything. If that is still the case, if not, please tell me and I'll be glad to report it. But if that's still the case, what can your organization do to see to it that some buses exist in Arlington to connect your residents to the existing transit network?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. And that was one of the main questions. If you followed the newspaper and radio, television coverage of the haranguing, 6 hours haranguing, which was mostly centered on Dallas attacking Arlington back 6 weeks ago. Arlington looks at it like this, so I can say this with some certainty. And first off, to go back in time about 40 years, my father's greatest defeat in his mind was failing to convince the citizens of Arlington. He was only a few years removed from being mayor in the early 80s when they had the mass referendum that went across the entire Metroplex, and Arlington was the major city that did not vote to join DART, or what became DART during that time. But where they did, they got a ride-sharing company, Via, which had been around for a while, that is circulating their traffic that's internal to the city and meeting the needs of that, whether it's UTA students or citizens needing to get in and around Arlington or connecting to, like, for example, the TRE up north, just at the northern end of Arlington. So they believe they're doing that at a significantly reduced cost. The other side of that, which that Dallas folks were saying very aggressively, is why in the heck would we put a stop in Arlington when they're not even a transit agency? There was a bit of a scuffle about what that would be, when that needed to happen, but I think Arlington's position is very firm. If the high-speed rail comes through and we're really going to have it, then we understand that we have to be a part of a transit authority at that point in time. But prior to that, honestly, I'm not speaking for them, so if somebody's here from Arlington, please step up and say something. But their position has been, we're covering the internal needs of our citizens, all 400,000 of them, and to spend the money on joining a transit authority that cannot reach us at this point in time is a bridge too far for them. So I don't know if that answered your question positively, but I hope that answered it. I knew it didn't. All right. Anybody else? All right, well, again, I want to tell you that I think that you've got a great conference coming. You have a lot of people coming up that are very professional, in particular in their strengths and needs in the industry. From our standpoint, it's kind of like the bread and butter of most everybody in the Metroplex is the roads and bridges, but at the same time, we're very keenly supportive of the transit options and want to see those continue to develop. And I think that honestly, at this point in my career, and it's been a while, this is as optimistic as I've been that the future will be good here. I don't know if I'll see it, but some of you here will. The ones of you that aren't the gray hairs, we probably will be a little more challenged, but the rest of you, I think, will see it, and it'll be a good thing coming.
Victor, we're not going to let you get away that quick here.
Okay.
We've got a couple more questions for you.
Sure. I didn't see him.
Yes, Victor, Cal Silverberg. What can you tell us about the plans for FIFA in 2026 and getting traffic to and from AT&T Stadium?
Well, that's one. Dan Lamers will be with you tomorrow from COG. I think I'd ask him that question, would be the better one. I have, based on high-level, sketch-level conversations, I have no doubt that they'll be prepared. When they had the Super Bowl, for example, there, the transportation was not the problem. The ice obviously impacted them significantly, but the transportation was not the problem. And I don't think it will be either on this one. I think they'll get around. I think you'll see some additional bus traffic moving in and out of there.
Any other questions?
Well, again,
Well, I do have one for you.
Sure.
There has been talk recently about creating a region-wide transportation agency. I know we have Trinity Metro, we have DART, we have DCTA. Is it time that we merged all three? I know there's been a little talk at the North Central Texas Council of Governments about that.
I think that this is where I'm going to be the politician's son that I am. I think that's probably a great question for those folks. In that's certainly been a long considered logical conclusion, perhaps at some point, but that's not for me to answer. Good try, though. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say one of the best experts in the room here today is not speaking, and that's James Bass, who is obviously now, he went over to the dark side a few years ago, as you all know, as head of the toll authority down in the Austin area, but the financial mastermind behind all the building that went on for about 20 years, and then led the agency very successfully through a trough that the legislature had. They had a lack of trust, but they trusted James Bass, and my hat's off to you again. All right. Thank you very much for having me.